theater, political campaigns, Supreme Court decisions, and just about anything else. I am particularly interested in American history and the way claims and arguments about the past shape our current politics and pop culture. And I have to say that as I was noting this conversation coming up on social media, I was thinking about how the semi-quincentennial has loomed very large this year in her coverage. She's been at the Times since 2005, and before, she was what I think of as owning the history beat. She was at the Book Review, where she edited reviews and wrote essays. With colleagues, she also wrote a book for young readers, Finish the Fight, The Brave and Revolutionary Women Who Fought for the Right to Vote. Previously, she worked at the New York Review of Books and at the Boston Globe. Jenny, thank you for being here for this conversation. It's really great to see you. So I'm going to start just by asking you, first of all, is my characterization of your beat right? That this is a thing I have said to you, I think, before, and I'm not sure I even said it in this intro, but I tend to characterize your beat as kind of covering the history industry. Like you cover academia, you cover federal agencies that fund and also launch and support and exhibit history. And you also cover, nonprofits. And then sometimes you're also doing stuff like breaking history stories, new discoveries, or most recently, of course, this amazing story on the anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So is that a fair characterization? Like history is like an industry for you?
Yes. I mean, I would say officially, more broadly, I cover intellectual life in the world of ideas. I'm going to prevent my usual habit of kind of bringing out my hands and doing weird finger quotes around the world of ideas, because I'm still a little bit hard pressed to say exactly what that is and what its boundaries are. So I write it in theory and in practice. I write about many things, but as Karin knows, I seem to end up writing an awful lot about history, and particularly American history. And I think for the next, 4.5 months, it might be all American history all the time.
Okay, so, I just want to remind you and every single journalist thinking about this that the revolution did not end on July 5th.
I know.
So I'm really hoping there will be some steam left. So let me start by just asking you some of the same questions that I asked for your colleagues, which is, how do you think of the relationship between history and journalism? Do you think of these as kind of parallel? I mean, there's this kind of quote that, maybe this emanated out of Ben Bradley, or maybe he took it from somewhere else, that journalism is the kind of first draft of history. How do you think about these kind of parallel projects of historians and journalists writing about the world around us?
Yeah, I mean, I think journalism and history, and I mean, maybe even scholarship more generally, but especially history, I think, are sort of both fundamentally about trying, it's the who, what, why, where, when. And you guys maybe have a little bit more of a heavy and sophisticated and complex emphasis on the why and the how, and also maybe the when, going back a lot farther. But I think I think journalism is also just an effort to establish what just happened, why did it happen, what's going to happen next, what's the broader context to the degree that we're able to get into that. So I think it's very, very similar. And I think usually we're writing about things that happened yesterday or maybe last week, maybe a couple months ago, or maybe in the case of the stuff I write about, and I, try to tell my editors, they're like, is this a new trend, a new discovery? I'm like, well, scholars have kind of been talking about this for several years, if not decades, but it's kind of coalesced.
That makes it new.
Yeah, it didn't just happen, but it's a similar thing of trying to just, and it's fact-based evidence, a fundamentally empirical. They're both kind of fundamentally empirical pursuits, and that's why I think you also see a lot of journalists writing history.
Yeah.
Whether it's history books, and then you see a lot of historians doing journalism, because I think they're, we have different methodologies, we have different, the profession structured differently, we have different incentives in some ways. We maybe have somewhat different casts of mind in some ways, but I think I think they're sort of parallel pursuits.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so much synergy. And it's just actually been really interesting to spend a little time thinking about that concentratedly. I think I just sort of had an ambient sense. Yes, these are, interestingly related, but this year it seems kind of urgent. Well, let me back up and ask you a little bit about, have you always been interested in history? Is this like something that, came along with your professional work? I know that you have worked on book reviews and you've been interested in reading, particularly reading and thinking about people who write. But have you been interested in history for a long time, or did that come along with your career?
I would actually say no, not in a specific sense. I mean, I think
Interesting.
I was a very bookish kid. I thought of
Yeah.
myself as being literary, even when I, didn't particularly know what that meant. I didn't grow up in an intellectual household or an academic household. And I think, yeah, I was interested in history in a general sense. Like,
Mm,
I wouldn't complain that much if we went to a historical site. And yeah, I think I'm just a generally very curious person, but I think started to become really interested in history. I think it might have even been 15 years ago when I started on this beat. And it
mm,
sort of came through covering, doing some stories about historical controversies or debates, and then learning a little bit more, meeting a lot of historians and learning more about, it sounds so simple-minded in a way, but learning more about how it actually works. Like, oh, right,
mm,
it matters what's in footnotes. And if people put
mm,
things in footnotes and not other things, other people might look askance at that.
mhm,
And it's not just a silly tempest in a teapot thing. There's actual stakes to that. Very interested in archival research. You know, New discoveries, what it even means to make a discovery. Very contested notion, I know. Um, and then I think also on another level, just the bigger question of, changes in interpretation and that kind of push and pull. And I remember this was quite a long time ago, maybe 12 years ago, I did a big story that was kind of a broad academic trend relating to American religious history. And this one scholar,
mm,
after my story appeared, said, "Oh, it's so great that the New York Times has a journalist who covers historiography." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, don't tell them that's what I'm doing." I mean, I'm not even sure that's what I thought I was doing, but they're like, "Don't tell them
mm,
that's what I'm doing, or I'll like get fired or reassigned." And then I remember this so clearly. He wrote back to me and said, "Oh, yes, the two great unmentionables, historiography and dissertation." So I'm like, right, my stories just can't include the words historiography or dissertation, even though often I'm talking about somebody's dissertation, and usually there's a lot of historiography. But to be more serious, I mean, I'm and I think too, I'm interested in the politics of history, both in the sense of the politics of the profession and within the profession, and then
mm,
also history as a something that infuses is fused by capital P politics. And I think that's, something we're seeing in a very big way right now.
robust.
And it's, I think maybe for the last 8 years, more than I've written stories even about purely scholarly projects, which I love doing. I've written a lot of stories about claims that are made about history or about the past or about the founding,
Yeah.
in by politicians and kind of in the broader political public sphere. And that's, I feel like this moment right now, this kind of head spinning moment is a fusion of all of those things. Like, what are historians, and including public historians and museum curators, trying to say about the founding or about all the other moments in American history, if that's their approach to the 50th, but also like it's happening in this really, really charged political moment
Mm,
where there's, a really high stakes struggle going on over what is the story we tell of our past, and why do we tell it, and why do we care? Like, why is it something that, the president cares so much about? Because
yeah.
it's not a given that like the president necessarily always cares. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Well, first of all, you gratified me so much because now in each of these three interviews, footnotes have been mentioned and historiography has been mentioned. So I feel like, okay, now I can die happy now because these two crucial elements to my
Yes.
professional and honestly, my identity have been addressed. So that's so interesting. There's so many pieces to what you talked about. One is just the way that you think about, like, I guess my shorthand is history as an industry, but you really do kind of get all the way around how history is being produced. Academic history is one thing, public history in its many different guises is obviously a deeply related enterprise, but is structurally different. And then, of course, there are all these like governmental pieces that are super prominent and, that we're all feeling quite aware of now between NEH, the National Archives, IMLS, like there's different funding agencies and those who kind of provision all of us, academic and public historians. So when you think about like, you're doing a story, are you thinking of aiming at one of those pieces, or do you always have that kind of fullest industry context in mind? And I really credit you with kind of representing that fullness in your journalism in a way that I think is probably quite revelatory to a lot of people.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think with any given story, I mean, I think the thing about journalism that people maybe even, um, the kind I do, that people who aren't journalists sort of don't get, it is like often you're kind of going by the seat of your pants, or it's catch as catch can, or like, oh my gosh, this happened yesterday. And there's been a lot more breaking news over the past year on my beat than ever. Writing a story in 3 hours, or what the heck just happened, and a lot of it has to do with things the administration is doing. I think so. Some stories I plan in advance and I think hard about how I'm going to frame them. Other stories, it's like, okay, this just happened, or I found out something and I want to report it before somebody else does.
Mm,
Um, I mean, but I think I do think, I mean, I've been doing this long enough and I've learned enough, I hope,
mm,
that I always have in some way in the back of my mind all of those things going, like what's really going on
mm.
here, because I am
Yeah.
really interested in institutions and how they work. And I'm interested in, universities and history departments and museums and archives. But also, I mean, in the last year, honestly, I don't think I particularly really knew anything about the NEH. And now I feel like I know a lot about this agency and how it actually works, or formerly worked, and maybe it works differently now. And that kind of deep, and also like, oh, what relationship does it have to other parts of the administration, to the White House, to,
Mm,
if anyone on this call knows, please call me, tell me. Um, but so I think it's always different, kind of depending on this story. But I always feel
mm,
like I want to keep the bigger picture in mind, like what's really going on here and why does it matter? And to kind of
mm.
point out in ways that are useful
Yeah.
to readers who want it or are attuned to it, of like other things to think about. It's not just what happened yesterday. There's a bigger picture, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's very abstract, but
Yeah. 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 No, there's the context, right? Even funding cuts to the NEH or
yeah.
changing priorities of the NEH, that has enormous ripple effects. Let me go back to ask you about that story you did on the anniversary of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, which is kind of an amazing story, really. Um, and amazing to read online, amazing to see in paper. But I want to ask you to talk a little bit about developing that story and reporting that story. And then I'm going to loop back to something you said about why people care about history writ large and how that might connect to this story you reported about, this extraordinary event. And now all of us are humming Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah, I mean, I can put it on my phone if you want. I'm glad you asked about it. It's funny because I think of that story. So that was something that was published in October. I think of that as like being this sort of weird lark that was outside of my
Oh.
normal, kind of world of concern. And it was almost like this sort of strange cultural memory travelogue. So
Mm,
uh, I grew up in the Midwest on the Great Lakes, the very, very bottom of Lake Michigan. Um, Old enough to remember when Gordon Lightfoot was on the radio a lot, hearing my parents listen to it. And I knew the song. And I think at some point along the way, I learned that, oh, there was a real shipwreck in 1975
mm,
that it was about. And I 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, yeah, almost 2 years ago, I was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan for a friend's mom's 90th birthday, and her mom came from this small, now very depressed mining town in the UP. Many of her ancestors and uncles and cousins had been miners, and then my friend mentioned, oh, one of my mom had a relative who died on the Edmund Fitzgerald, and I'm like, no, there's no way that's true. And then literally 2 weeks later, when I got back to New York, I learned through a book publicist I know, like, oh, next summer we're publishing a book about the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald because it's the 50th anniversary. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do a story about this. And it sort of evolved into me. The author of the book was a popular author. He's written a lot of
Hmm.
books about sports. He's from Michigan, a lot of books about sports, leadership. He'd done a book about the Halifax explosion. But he had done this very research, kind of perfect stormish,
Hmm.
very focused on the lives of these men, these salt of the earth towns they came from, the history of Great Lakes shipping. This is my very long-winded answer. I could talk about this for 45
No,
minutes.
no, it's so good. It's good.
Yeah.
This
So
context is really important to my questions.
he had done all the, I mean, but it's sort of like writing about a book by a historian. Like he did all the work. He did
Mm.
all of this exhaustive research, including archival research, including trying to find lost and hidden documents that maybe had been destroyed, um, tracking down survivors, relatives, interviewing people, going to places, finding, he interviewed like 17 bartenders at old sailor bars around the Great Lakes.
Oh,
And so he had kind of done all the work. And I was like, it sort of then became, oh, can we get on a boat? And we got on a boat, which takes some doing. You cannot just get on these boats. And also, once we got on the boat, we kind of were stuck on the boat
yeah.
longer than we expected because there was a steam leak. It was all starting to seem a little too on the nose. So I ended up being on the boat for a week, and it became much more like, one thing I found completely fascinating was the degree to which in a lot of these towns and ports around the Great Lakes, there's just a really, really strong cultural memory of this wreck, in large part because of Gordon Lightfoot, because of the song, but also this feeling of like, oh, it happened near here. It happened to people like us. And was
Yeah.
so like touching and fascinating. We did go to a bunch of these bars, by the way. Um,
Mm.
and so the story became, I don't know, I really felt like it was just this, and I was very enchanted by these mariners I met and being on this boat, which was itself like really antiquated because it was an old
Yeah.
steamship that had been on the lake the night that Edmund Fitzgerald sank. Anyway, it was just a lot of these different elements. And to me, in my mind, it had kind of nothing to do with like the kind of history I normally think about it, but it was like, oh, this story, this history, the fact that boats like this existed, people worked on them,
Yeah.
they were a source of identity, regional identity
Yeah.
in a region that kind of doesn't get talked about that much outside the region.
Mm.
Very powerful. And I published this story. It was very well read, but I got something like 100 personal emails from readers. That never, ever, ever happens. Many of them were kind of long. Many of them were from people who had worked on that ship, had seen the ships when they were a kid growing up in wherever.
Amazing.
It's amazing. Like it, so kind of to your point, so maybe in a way it does connect with all this stuff about the founding era and about American history. Like, oh, people, I feel like, well, I'm, very intellectually oriented. Like I love to read history, including academic history. And I'm not just saying that, Karin. Um, but I'm like, why does any of this actually matter? I mean,
Yeah.
I think, intellectual curiosity and curiosity about the past or about anything matters in its own right, but it really matters to people. And that's why we fight about
Mhm.
it. So
Yes.
I feel like and that's what I find really fascinating about this whole 2026 year. Like, because I'm old enough to just barely to remember the bicentennial and realizing, oh, right, this is another moment like that, except it'll be a very
Yeah.
different moment. And like, oh, what will it be? And what, it itself will be a historical event. And who are we as a country? Who gets to decide? Who cares? I don't know. All these questions are in play. And
Yeah.
we have 4.5 months to answer all the questions. Your
Exactly.
editors will lose interest, but mine will. Just kidding. Yeah.
So the book is John Bacon's Gales of November, right? So I just wanted to say that
Yes,
for the record for the audience. And
it's a very good book. It's a very good book. Yeah.
it was a really good story. And so what struck me about the way you reported that story and the way you report about some of these issues around, let's say, for example, the recent controversy over the president's house in Philadelphia, where the administration had removed this essential exhibit about slavery at the president's house. Including, that would have been obviously the story of Ona Judge made, which is absolutely central to our understanding of the Washingtons and slavery at this point. in part through the great work of Erica Dunbar and her wonderful book, Never Caught. Um, but, you know, that kind of local history um, kind of work and the way that it knits into local historical memory too, because the
Mm,
President's House exhibit was not just, the federal government coming in and dropping some kind of exhibit on top of that space. That was the product of a lot of community organizing. And it strikes me that a lot of the stories you're reporting have some element of that. They're not detached from
mm.
community attachments to memory. So I'm wondering if that's a kind of a theme you're starting to feel about the 250th, or whether it's just obvious in that kind of like the
Yeah,
President's House, it's there, but is it like in other places too?
that's a great question. I mean, I would imagine that in a lot of other places too, local people are very protective of their,
Mm-hmm.
people, and this is all different kinds of people for all different kinds of reasons with all different
Yep.
kinds of politics,
Yep.
very protective of their site, like the
Yeah.
statue of X person, the memorial to Y, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's something that was put up a long time ago and is valued or something that's newer that was hard won recently. That's a really interesting question. Because yeah, I think what I tried to convey in the stories I wrote about the president's house, like I contributed to some breaking news, like this just happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I want to do a bigger story because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's really conveyed why this site is there.
Yeah.
Like why it's not just why it's there, because the house was there, but why it took this form it did. And even I
Mm-hmm.
didn't totally understand it. And because I happened to be here the day after the signs were crowbarred off, and people were many, many people were coming to the site, and people were really upset. And obviously the people who don't know, don't care, or were totally happy to see the signs removed aren't like coming to the site. So, but like, wow, people felt like this was something the federal government was doing to Philadelphia. And it was at
Mm-hmm.
the very moment of, I think, the kind of highest pitch of stuff going on in Minneapolis. I was at the President's House site 2 days after the signs were removed, and I looked at my phone and I saw someone shot and killed, and that was Alex
Yeah.
Preddy. And people were putting up signs that referred to ICE, and it just felt like, rightly, wrongly, for some people here in Philly, I'm in a hotel room in Philly right now again. Um, it felt like an attack on the city, and then that's why you had the city
Yeah.
itself suing the National Park Service and many, many community organizations speaking in favor or filing amicus briefs. Like it felt like a um, attack on the city and the city's
Yeah.
identity. And it's not like, yes,
Yeah.
it's a nationally significant site, but
Yeah.
also our site, our city. I just walked by there,
Yeah.
by the way. It's kind of a cold um, day, and there aren't as many signs taped up, but people have written in, permanent marker or paint on the walls, a lot of stuff.
Mm.
I mean, those signs will come back eventually, but if the goal was to remove traces, like they didn't do a very good job because
It
all they did
didn't. Yeah.
was open up this canvas for an even more pointed kind of communication. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Streisand effect for sure. I mean, an amazing thing. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it does. I mean, not to beat this into the ground, but I do think that that point about the kind of community attachment to the memory of the Fitz, and this community attachment to this exhibit is really important when we're thinking about the semi-quincentennial. I wonder. So you've been covering a lot of the kind of structural issues around the semi-quincentennial, the kind of movements of agency funding and the changing shape
Mm.
of kind of funding infrastructure and things like that. Are you feeling like you're going to be able to, or are you feeling like you're starting to also get reporting on how people are responding really personally to these issues of local memory, and so on?
Maybe a tiny bit. And to do that, I honestly need to like go more places because I'm not going to like learn that in my sitting in my apartment or in my office or even in New York. Uh, a bit because I'm hearing from more people, and I think also the broader public. I mean, I think I'm really interested in now, and I don't. I mean, it's so hard to get at. Is I feel like I've spent a lot of. I mean, I've been writing about the I think I used the word semi-quincentennial in a story for the first time 5 years ago. Still not in our spell checker, by the way. Um, and nobody was talking about this. Um, and I think some of my colleagues was like, that's you thought I was kind of weird and like, why are you going on about this? Um, and now like a lot of people are, including a lot of my colleagues, are actually interested in it. But I think I've spent a lot of time talking to historians, curators, people involved in
Mhm.
public history, funders, state planners, and I'm now becoming curious about am I going to get this right? The demand side, like, do I
Right.
have a good grip on the different kinds of projects and messages
Yeah.
that
On the
people
supply side.
about this um, want to get out there? What do ordinary Americans, whatever that even means,
Hmm.
want from it? What
Yeah.
will they take in? They'll walk through. I mean, one thing I was kind of fascinated by, even with respect to the president's house, is, 2 million people, 3 million people come to Independence Park every year in a normal year. If you go into the Liberty Bell, you have to walk through that site. But then you go on like TripAdvisor, which obviously is not a scientific sample, and they're like 5,000 rankings for the Liberty Bell with comments. They're 92 for the president's house. Almost all of them are really terse, like great site or interesting site or this is confusing. A few of them complained about it being, quote unquote woke. Not very
Mm-hmm.
many. So even there, I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. I mean, obviously, what moves you to write a TripAdvisor review? But I'm like, I'm not even this site, which is quite direct about what it's about. Maybe people are kind of walking through and they look for 5 seconds, they go, huh, and they keep going.
And
So
they move on.
having something on the ground, yeah. And so I'm curious, when July, and I know it's not all over on July 4th, Karin. People are going to be where they're going to be thinking about what they want to think about. And then it's kind of in their hands. And most people do kind of want to go to a picnic, a parade,
Hmm.
fireworks, maybe something with a commemorative edge that's a little more content infused than usual, but I don't know.
Mm.
So I'm curious about just attempting to learn more about what do people actually want from this and what will they get? And I think that's because fundamentally the 250th is itself a historical event. As with the
Yes.
bicentennial, I don't think you could have said on July 5th, oh, hey, here's what happened, here's what it meant. It took a while for it to register, oh, this is what it was, this is what it meant, this is what it left behind.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something
No,
I'm
and
curious about. Yeah.
yeah. Are you interested in drawing these connections between what happened during the bicentennial and kind of retrospectives on the bicentennial, or even, those kind of moments of preparation for the bicentennial? I'm not going to mention John F. Kennedy because I think that's my party piece. Um, but um, but thinking about the bicentennial as kind of analogous to or distinct from 2026.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there have been a bunch of stories like that, including by some of my colleagues already on
Mhm.
that. So, uh, which doesn't mean it's exhausted the subject, but I'm very curious about it and interested. And I think too, and I know you've made this point in a lot of venues, Karin, about what it left behind in terms of institutions, in terms of
Mm.
kind of intellectual work. And then also, I don't know, will it, there's an argument that gets made that by scholars, I'm thinking of one scholar in particular whose name I'm not going to be able to pronounce correctly, that it's MJ. She has a
Oh,
high.
MJ, she's going to be here next week, actually talking.
Amazing.
Yes,
I love her
and
book.
she's going to
I love
do
her book.
yeah, it is great. And
Great
she's going to do
lives.
yep, and she's going to do a
I don't
workshop.
know.
Yep.
I've spoken to her a number of times, and I'm not going to off the cuff be able to pronounce her name correctly. But she makes this argument that feels very persuasive to me based on my own just personal experience, even though I was extremely young at the time. That it changed that period and how much it was, caused by the bicentennial, or it's a correlation. I don't know.
Mm,
Changed the way the past came to seem more immediate. And part
yes.
of genealogy is a part of it. Roots, right?
Hmm.
76 was Roots, the book.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
The book Roots, indeed. Alex Haley. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, I lost my train of thought here. Oh, how it made people have a more immediate sense of history, fueled a lot of intensified interest in public history, or sorry, local history,
Mm-hmm.
genealogy. I mean, it was the
Mm-hmm.
whole like Little House on the Prairie on TV moment. Maybe that was a tiny bit later, which made a big impact on me. Um, but just so like, oh, what's our relationship to our history now? And I think it's,
Mm-hmm.
even though many, many more people of different sorts are engaged in it, I do think maybe our relationship is much more vexed, because we know
Mm-hmm.
a lot more and we know a lot of things that some people don't want to know, there's hard to know, that are hard to kind of accept, hard to kind of reconcile with other things feel about the country, about our history, and also some people just kind of don't want to know. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I mean, feel like I'm in the realm of total speculation here, but I think our relationship with history has become really, really vexed. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think even to go back to the president's house and the whole question of slavery and the founding and the relationship between the founders themselves and slavery and enslaved people, like for some people, that's like, meh, game over. Don't like those guys,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
very reductive, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that stuff it wasn't absent, but it was sort of barely there in 1976 for the average person. I think and also we're a really different country in a lot of ways. So I'm completely rambling here, but uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just
It's
curious
it.
about how is it going to matter to people and how much will it affect our broader public culture and will it fuel a boom or boomlet in interest in
Yeah.
history
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
not, or because it
Yeah.
ultimately it's become so politicized, will there be this kind of negative polarization going on? I don't know. Fascinating.
I think there's a really interesting
What do you
question to well, no, I was going to say I think there's a really interesting question to be asked about what is the relationship between community and local histories and
think?
some kind of grander kind of national narrative. And I think that grander national narrative, it's an open question how much that was actually a, like something representative, and how much kind of local and community understandings of history have always been important. Like,
Yeah,
Black communities have always thought about like the fact of presidents having been enslavers. Like that was not news for a lot of people, but it's was news in a sense to that national narrative. So
yeah.
it's like it's almost that relationship between community and local practices. But to go back to the kind of structural thing, um, we have talked before about the enormous number of small local historical societies and the way that local entities are organizing themselves and how fun it is to contemplate that. I think here in Rhode Island, 400 some
Mm,
historical organizations. I mean, big ones like the Rhode Island Historical Society, but also, much smaller groups. And then 30 some, this is terrible. I should know exactly how many towns there are in Rhode Island. I think it's 32. But every town, has its own 250 that Rhode Island 250 is helping to support.
mm,
And I imagine like these being highly localized experiences. And some of these towns have really intense, like, you know, um, traditions that go back way before the bicentennial, like, back to the, centennial. Um, so, I wonder what's going to be the relationship between those super local things and those bigger things. And you've reported on a little bit of that by going to the, those Virginia gatherings, the Common
mm.
Cause gatherings, and trying to see what people are doing all across the country. Sorry, this is a very long-winded question, but like, what do you think about like what's happening out there in the world, and how are you able to kind of report that, like how these, you
Yeah.
know, like the
It's hard.
Nebraska 250 or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go so Colonial Williamsburg, again, some of the Virginia groups organized this big, for 3 years in a row, gathering of planners from around the country. Very heavy on Virginia, but kind of had people from just about everywhere. And I met tons of, people from Colorado and Utah and Arizona and North Carolina and Vermont, and since the last of those gatherings was a year ago, I haven't seen a lot of those people since then. So
Mm,
I don't know. I feel like now I'm like, oh, I got to plot what are the like 4 places I'm actually going to go,
mm,
and when and why. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think most people, my guess would be most people will experience it to the degree they experience it or want to experience it in their
mm,
hometown or wherever they
mhm.
are for the 4th of July. I mean, some people will maybe go somewhere special, or some people will be like, this is a good time to leave the country. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's how some people feel.
yeah.
I'm fortunate. I live in New York City, so if I'm in New York City, there will be this like massive ship event, which will be very intense.
The tall ships. Yeah.
Saw them in Boston when I was a little kid. And it's actually really quite fascinating to go back and read the stories in the New York Times in 1976 about the ships and the really intense response. And that was an intense time in New York City. But there were these stories about how one day, I don't know if it was July 4th itself, because they were there for a week or something, so many people came that they like overran the barricades and they lost control of crowds. And it wasn't, violent stampedes
Amazing.
or anything. And people were like going on the ships. And it was just like everybody having this, at least as it was written about, this experience of kind of like this lark and this sense of wonder at like, whoa, there are all these ships here and this is cool.
Mm,
And I'm like, oh, I mean, obviously there's so much concern with security, right? In the world right now, I don't think people are going to be like overrunning any barricades. But I feel like, yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's just going to be like, wow, whatever they see that day. And
mm.
I don't know. So let me tell you, if you want a hotel room in Philly, get it now because it's also the World Cup that day. And there's only a few rooms left and they're all over $1,000 because I checked.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I keep saying like this is like for historians, this is like Super Bowl every day
exactly. Yeah.
from now until July, well, whatever. Um, so let me ask you a little bit more about like how you think about reporting history. Let's even stepping back from the semi-quin, which is obviously very big because you've been reporting on this for quite a while, but you've also been reporting kind of parameters of historical work, even outside that context. How do you imagine your reporting going forward that is historically informed or about the history industry or whatever? How do you imagine that after the big
That's
hurrah?
a great question. Because I mean, I probably shouldn't even say this in public, but sometimes I've had this thought. I'm like, okay, July 10th, let's say July 10th, like I'm going on vacation. And then when I come back, I'm going to find something totally different to do. I'm going to find a totally new beat because I'm going to be like, oh man, I've done it. I've done it. I'm done. Um, I
I
don't
hope
know.
not.
I don't know. I mean, and honestly, there's so little. There might be a couple of stories I know I want to do that maybe are vaguely history related for after
Mm,
July 4th, but I tend not to think that far ahead at all.
mm,
Yeah.
hmm hmm
So
hmm
I kind of have absolutely no idea what I'm going to be doing after that, but it's
All
going to
right.
be
Well, it's going to be fun, right? All right. Let me ask you another question. I'm just going to remind people that as soon as we get to 5:45, I will start taking questions off the Q&A. If people want to put them in the Q&A function, you just
oh my
like
gosh,
have
your
to.
questions.
Yeah, they're going to ask. I will look at the questions and then I will ask them to you. So you don't have
Okay.
to look at anything. Yeah. So I'm just reminding people who are here. Um, so let me ask you about, I guess, from a slightly different vantage. When you think about having reported on history for so long, having read so much historical work, having been in conversation with historians who are working in all these different positions, do you think about when you're reporting a story, do you think about historical context that is not the specific subject of your story, but like, is the methodology kind of infecting you?
Ooh, oh, gosh, I'm not sure. Um, Historical context meaning our
Meaning
present
like of
context
whatever you're writing
or
about,
the
like,
bigger, like, oh, what else was happening in 1780 or
yeah, or just
what's
like,
happening right
yes, all of the kind of the way that historians frame a question in terms of we're in this moment right now. We need to understand it by backing up and seeing, like, because every moment is only, of course, the accumulation of the things that have come before. That's the fundamental method of historians. So I'm just wondering if that has kind of infected you, because journalism is about the right now. And it is
Yeah.
sort of about context, but it isn't always about kind of developing
Yeah.
historical context per se.
I'm not sure in a deliberate way I am aware
Mm,
of things that way, but I do realize since you asked the question, like, oh, right, I'm always like, well, this has a history, right? Or even the example of the president's house, like,
yeah.
it's important to understand like what happened in 2002 in
Yeah.
Philadelphia, when it was discovered or publicized
Yes.
the fact that these foundations under
Yes.
the site included this quarters where enslaved people live. And then there was a multi-year fight. And in 2006, there was an agreement. And in 2010, it opened. And if you're missing something, if that's not, you're missing something that's important to understand. I mean, enough said about that. But I think I always feel like, and even when I'm writing about, um, fields or subfields that are in academia, like academic
Mm,
departments or disciplines that kind of come into the news, like area studies. It's like, well, they exist, these fields exist, these departments exist because of a particular history, you know, as do the ones that you maybe assume have been there forever, like English departments. They also spring from a fairly, yeah, actually, in fact, somewhat recent historical moment. And if you're going to be making kind of generalizations about universities and what they teach and knowledge and scholarship, you need to have some kind of general awareness of that. And so
mm.
I feel like it's always like a little bit baked into how I think about things. But I don't know. I'm not sure my method is as conscious and deliberate as yours.
No, I think exactly what you're describing is exactly like how historians would go about something like,
Yeah, yeah.
how do I understand this, situating it, that's, I feel very gratified by that. How do you decide what to write? Like, does something like literally pop up in your inbox? Does your assigning editor say, hey, this thing has happened? Like, what's the range of ways that you decide you're going to be able to write about something like a development at the NEH or something at the National Archives or, some other development?
I think sometimes people tell me like, "Hey, this is happening," or "This book is coming out. This scholar is really interesting," or "There's this argument." I will sometimes it's pegged to events.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes it's something people really directly pitch me, like, the National Archive says, "Hey, we're going to be sending this Freedom plane airplane all over the country with
right.
founding era documents." I'm like, "Great. Like,
Yeah. Tell me more.
tell me more." Yeah. Sometimes it's very pure, like, I wonder about X, or I have some kind of
Mm,
instinct, just curiosity. And I mean, it sounds so dumb in some ways, but a lot of what I do, I'm very fortunate. Most of the stories I do were my idea, which is actually sometimes unfortunate because if I'm in the middle of the story and I'm struggling, or I decide I hate the story and I'm really bored and frustrated, I'm like, oh my gosh, whose idea was this? I'm like, oh, okay, it was my idea. Never mind.
Past Jenny.
So most of my stories are my idea in one way or another, and I have a very sage, very tolerant, but very discerning and sage editor who usually lets me do what I want, but
Mm,
sometimes doesn't, and often he is right about that.
mm,
Um,
mm.
and honestly, sometimes I have like 20 stories I know I want to do. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do now? It's very, I mean, in reality, I have no shortage of things to write about, but
Yeah.
it's there's not as much rhyme or reason as you would think. And I'm always open to
Mm,
hearing about things that are going on. And
mm,
sometimes things people say, hey, this conference is happening, this person is really interesting, X, and it's not something I'm going to write about, but it
mhm.
lodges in my brain and it becomes relevant later.
Yeah.
So, hate to say it because my life has improved since I spend less time on Twitter, but I used to learn about stuff from Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I know. I regret that
Sometimes that,
too.
that can be
Yeah.
quite distorted in its own way.
Hmm.
Because it's not a snapshot, but I did I learned a lot about people who are out there, arguments that are out there, also just what are people talking about. Yeah, it's sort of all over the place. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, what's the fastest you've ever had to get a story up and out, and what's the longest you've spent researching a story?
I mean, sometimes like 2 hours, like a
Wow.
pure breaking news thing. And initially, because I didn't come out of a news background at all, like the first time I had to do that, I was terrified. And it's like, oh, right, you actually can do it. I mean, one, you develop, it's a muscle, you build the skill. You just are like, it's going to be what it's going to be. You have to let go of your perfectionism. And then that's also when you realize there's a whole kind of machinery apparatus around you. Like you can write a really crappy, fragmentary draft, and maybe you're working with somebody else if you have 2 hours. And then it's just like whatever you file, it goes through a process and it will be publishable. And not everything has to be some masterpiece. The longest, I mean, I don't think I've ever spent more than 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks working only on one thing. Sometimes things have taken longer just because I start and then I stop, or I start and then I need to wait for something else to happen. But I've never done like I mean, I know some of my colleagues in investigations, like they'll spend 8 months, but that's the kind of
Mm,
reporting where you are just, it's so hard to get any information. You're trying to
mhm,
sources who will talk to you about
mhm,
something where
mhm.
it's really scary to talk about. So you might be, flying to Romania for the weekend to try to get somebody to talk to you. I don't know. I don't do
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah, I've never, but I really like being published. So that's the reason, one thing that's really great. I mean, journalism can be really stressful. The deadlines can be stressful, but like you constantly kind of, I just like being in the paper. It's a really retro way to talk
Yeah.
about it. I like to like, oh, I gotta get this out there. And then I want to have a lot of, um, you know, I like doing a lot. So I like having, and there's a lot of adrenaline with the fast breaking stuff too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I
sometimes
was
it's just
just looking at, I mean, you've
fast,
published a lot just in the last 2 months. These are like a
right?
lot of stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 But then you like colleagues of mine in the Washington Bureau who cover, especially if they cover like the White House, it's
Oh,
like
well.
they
Yeah.
do 3 stories a day, and
Yeah.
it's a completely different thing. And I know from sometimes, I mean, I know some of those people, and occasionally collaborating, just the adrenaline is, or the metabolism, that's the word, is like, whoa, how are they doing all this? But
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. I have a really good question here um, from David. Thank you, David. Great question. What advice, and I'm going to tag something onto this, what advice would you give to historians for when they are interviewed by journalists? And the tag I want to add to that is like there are different kinds of interviews, right? Like sometimes someone just needs information from you. Sometimes someone's interviewing you about something that's right in your bailiwick. And sometimes they're interviewing you because you're like kind of ambient to the situation. So I'm wondering if there's like differences there. But what advice would you give to historians um, directly as the question was asked when they're being interviewed by journalists, but also like how could historians actually be helpful to journalists? What's the most helpful thing we could do?
It's a great question. I mean, I feel like historians are always very helpful to me. So everything is helpful. Um, I think maybe going in, I mean, and this is for your own, so you also have a positive experience. Going in, just have clarity, like what do they, how long do they want to talk to you? Usually, I mean, when I write to people, I try to kind of give some sense of like this could be very quick, or,
Yeah.
but also maybe ask, what do you want? What do you want to know from me? Or like, what should I do
Mm,
to prepare for this interview? And I mean, from
mm,
my end, I'll often say to people, like, if there's anything you think I should read in advance.
mm,
I mean, I feel like, oh gosh, that's dangerous because I don't necessarily have time to read it in advance. And they could be like, here's my book. But sometimes I'll be like, or especially if I know they've written a particular paper and I don't have access to it,
mm,
something like, if is there anything you think I should read or at least look at to be more prepared? Um, yeah, I think, establish whether you're speaking on the record or not.
mm,
Be clear about that. Um, be, I would say, be mindful and protective of your own time. Um,
mm,
and because I think the thing is, I don't, it kind of depends what I'm doing. I tend to quote a lot of people depending on the kind of story, but often like you can't quote anybody, and it's always feels like, what's the right word here? Kind of a really unpleasant experience when for me as a journalist, and I, totally
Mm,
accept it, there's an unpleasant experience from the historian's point of the scholar's point of view, the expert's point of view, where you've done a story and then someone's really mad that you didn't quote them. Whereas
yeah,
like you've only quoted one sentence. And I think it's like have a little bit of don't spend more
yeah,
time you're willing to
yeah,
spend.
yeah, yeah.
And understand too that journalists are often talking to a lot of people. And
Hmm.
ultimately it's just like what works for the story. And so
Hmm.
the story gets cut in half. So I think just don't spend more time than you're willing to spend.
That's really good advice.
Be clear with yourself about that. Um, which isn't to say that every journalist is always respectful or mindful of other people's
Hmm.
time and expertise, but I think like you kind of have to like be in the driver's seat on that. Um, yeah, I think that those would
Yeah,
be my
those are good. Yeah,
so just like clarity going in. And I think especially the like I mean, I think most of the historians I talk to are pretty sophisticated about stuff like this, like getting when you're talking on the record
yeah,
and when you're not, and just clarify so you know.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I would imagine that's
Yeah, and I
particularly
mean,
tricky.
I do, and it's, so easy to sound like Pollyannish about this, like, I really do it's not just historians, anybody I talk to, I try to be respectful of their time, respectful of them, acknowledging of them, but I think also, like, we have the way that we do our job, which is all about writing the best story,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
right, right, right. I think that that kind of expectation setting is really important. And do you think that's even more important in the moment when we are, I mean, maybe I just have a blinkered view of this particular context, but do you feel like you might be talking to academics now in this kind of context where the administration is taking all kinds of actions, where
Mm.
you're talking to more kind of academics off the record, or more folks, kind of in the history business broadly off the record because of administrative actions than you have, say, in the past. I don't even know how you would measure that, but
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say over the past year, and it's not even just academics, I've had a lot more,
yeah.
I don't know about a lot more off the record, but a lot more people are mindful of or concerned about. I mean, I actually have not had that many conversations with academics where they're like, I don't want my name in the paper because especially at like public schools in some states, like
Hmm.
politicians in my state will come after me. Like, I tend not to be writing stories where that kind of thing is going to happen. But yeah, no, definitely. I mean, in trying to write about the NEH, trying to write about some of the Trump history initiatives, like,
Hmm.
I've again, like we don't discuss sourcing, but like, yeah, a lot of
That's
time,
tricky.
your people are not going to talk to you on the record if they'll talk to you at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, really tough.
Yeah.
Um, Here's a really good question, which is from Rick. When you come across a new idea or a topic to write about, is there a kind of threshold of significance it needs to rise to for you to commit to it? Or how would you even define like what's significant enough to write about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, sometimes my editor's like, like this is too small, or I don't see it, and or
Yeah,
can you connect it to Trump? I mean, it's not quite that crude, but it's a little
yeah,
like
yeah.
thing.
The right now.
And I think, yeah, obviously I have my own threshold for because there's stuff that I'm like, oh, that's so interesting, but like I couldn't write about it.
Mm,
Um, but I feel like one thing I'm actually good at and I feel proud of is making things that might seem pretty arcane interesting,
mhm,
interesting and fun, maybe, and
mhm,
consequential, not just like, oh, look
mhm,
at this wacky study
mhm,
somebody's doing about pointy shoes, or I don't know.
mhm.
Um, but I kind of like that. I don't know, and I think I kind of
It's
have
like
a
a
good eye
challenge.
for yarn, or like, ooh, this
Yeah.
is a weird yarn involving,
Hmm.
I mean, a thing I said I have in my bio on the New York Times site. This is my total egomania here. Is that I'm so proud that twice in the 21st century I got Walt Whitman and a picture of Walt Whitman on the front page of the New York Times. I'm like, and then Walt Whitman, who had this, incredible career in journalism in the 19th century. A lot of it was in it as it happened. It was all about previously unidentified anonymous or pseudonymous journalism he did. But I'm like, I love this, like ashes to ashes, newsprint to newsprint. And like, people are, but you can do that with a canonical author,
Yeah.
Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, like, woo, people love reading about that.
Mm-hmm.
Make that,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot harder when it's a secondary author or an author nobody has heard of. But anyway, I
Yeah. But
like
I've seen you do that
love
too.
getting that,
But
like,
I have seen that. I have seen that
yeah.
too. I was just thinking about a local case of that, in fact. Okay, one last question from me, which is, what would it? I don't know how to even phrase this. Obviously, the challenges to history and the humanities are going to go beyond July 5th, and the
Really?
way.
Oh, God. I was hoping it would
Word
all be
is.
settled. We'd come to some kind of agreement.
Right. Word is. So, what do you think it would take for the kind of stuff that you've been writing about to kind of stay in the pages of the New York Times and to stay to the attention of New York Times readers, absent the context of the semi-quincentennial?
I think, I mean, in a way, it might make their I think there will be this sort of aftermath, both the immediate aftermath and then the
Mm,
somewhat longer, more medium term aftermath of like, okay, what the heck was that? What just happened?
mm, mhm.
I think maybe. I mean, I feel like I've already been, shamelessly American history centric and sort of haven't written about non-American history in a while. Um, I feel like it might open up space for other topics,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Even though I think the interest in a lot of those topics is still there, always there. And again,
always there.
journalistically, it's a lot harder to
Yep,
write about, Korean history or Egyptian history or even French history,
yeah,
But I think there's still a lot of room for stories about different aspects of American history and, not
yeah.
just the topics everybody, general readers love, like World War II, you know, World
Civil
War
War.
II, Germany, Civil War. It's like, yeah. Um, uh, but yeah, maybe there'll be maybe people will be kind of burned out on founding era, at least for a little bit. Sorry, Karen. It's going to be,
No,
it's going to be wall to
never,
wall to
never.
wall until, yeah,
But
yeah.
well, maybe we can conclude by thinking that maybe the gift of the semi-quincentennial and this incredible challenge to humanities research infrastructure and history knowledge will actually open up this space for us to think about all the fantastic historical work that's going on out there, well beyond, the 18th or 19th century or American history. I like that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I do think, like, I find the founding and all the questions around it fascinating, all the historiography around it fascinating. I do think for the reasons you yourself have often articulated well, like our founding story, whether it's a story, whether it's a mythology, whether it's a history, whatever blend of all three is really important. It is the thing that many of us in the we like often reach for. Um, but I think so many, even talking to a lot of like 250th planners around the country and especially in places outside the 13 colonies, like, yeah, they're talking about Colorado history or,
Yes.
you know, Western history, settlement of the West. They're just not talking about the same things as
Yeah.
people in Philly and Rhode Island are talking about. Yeah. I mean, there's some of that. There's some of that, but yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny. This is a wonderful conversation. I
But
really enjoyed it so much and enjoy reading your work always. So thanks for doing this.
thanks so much. Really a pleasure.
Okay, take care. Bye.